In our lecture today, we're going to focus on the auditing standards. Keep in mind that the auditing standards provides guidance in regards to how audits are completed. This guidance comes from the professional auditing standards boards that an organization needs to follow. Auditors in the United States follow the guidance issued by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, or the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board. All of these provide assurances, or the objective of these is to provide assurance that the public audits are conducted in a quality manner. Keep in mind that the type of standards that we use is dependent upon the type of the audit that we're doing. The auditing standards apply to the auditor's task of developing and communicating an opinion on financial statements as part of an integrated audit. And if you remember, the integrated audit is the audit where we conduct an audit of the internal controls over financial reporting, as well as expressing an opinion and conducting an audit on the financial statements. The relevant auditing standards and the professional association standards that we follow depends upon the nature of the organization being audited, on where the organization is, and on where its stock is publicly traded. So we focus on these three primary standard setting organizations. However, we're going to spend some time talking specifically about the PCAOB. Historically, the AICPA has been the organization that has developed these standards. These standards use the terminology of the Statement on Auditing Standards. These standards apply to audits of most U.S. non-public entities. The PCAOB gets its authority from the U.S. Congress in the Act of the Sarbanes-Oxley of 2002. Terminology includes auditing standards and interim standards. We're going to give some examples of those in just a few minutes. The audit of U.S. public companies is the scope of applicability for these PCAOB standards. Keep in mind that any company that is a U.S. publicly traded company needs to follow the standards of the PCAOB. The international standards, the authority is based upon the agreed upon arrangement where countries have agreed to abide by these international standards. They use the terminology of the international standards on auditing, and these apply to audits in countries for which the international standards are required, including most Europe and many emerging markets. As we're going through this, keep in mind that the basis for all of these standards is what we call the 10 standards. These 10 standards are divided into three areas, including the general standards. This is related to the guidance for training and the independence of the auditor. Specific fieldwork standards are applicable to the conduct of the audit, and reporting standards are applicable to communicating the auditor's opinion. Now I want to spend just a few minutes and talk a little bit more in depth in relationship to these specific standards. So I've got two audit reports here. You notice this first audit report is an audit report of the financial statements for the American Red Cross. Well, the American Red Cross is a not-for-profit organization in the U.S. So you notice what I have highlighted here, that the auditor, KPMG, is stating that we conducted our audit in accordance with the auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America. So these standards, the guidance for these standards for this audit is coming from the AICPA. Now notice the next audit. This is an audit of General Electric. And notice how the verbiage is slightly different. So you notice in the highlighted area, it states that we conduct our audits in accordance with the standards of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board in the United States. General Electric obviously is a publicly traded company, so the auditing standards that apply to this audit are coming from the PCAOB. Considering the fact that the PCAOB frames the basis for most of the work that we do, at least from the perspective of the CPA exam, what I wanted to do is to go specifically to these standards. So you notice if you go to the PCAOB website and go to standards, then auditing, what you're going to see is some very specific standards. So we have the auditing standards, AS is the nomenclature, and then we have the interim standards. So you notice that the interim standards is, as described here, interim auditing standards consist of generally accepted auditing standards as described in the AICPA Auditing Standards Board Statement of Auditing number 95. So let's go specifically to the generally accepted auditing standards. So if we go to the generally accepted auditing standards, what we're going to see here is we're going to see the general standards, we're going to see the standards of fieldwork, and then finally the standards of reporting. So you notice in the general standards is this includes the requirement that the people that complete the audit are those that have adequate technical training and proficiency as an auditor. The second general standard is that in all matters related to the assignment, an independence and mental attitude is to be maintained. The third general standard relates to due professional care is to be exercised in the performance of the audit and the preparation of the report. The standards of field work include the fact that the work is to be adequately planned and assistance, if any, are to be properly supervised. Number two, we'll actually come back to this several times during our upcoming lectures because this really drives how we complete the audit. A sufficient understanding of internal controls is to be obtained to plan the audit and to determine the nature, timing, and extent of audit tests to be performed. So this essentially implies a process, a risk assessment process that we're going to go into in just a few minutes, because what you notice here is in red, it states that the following paragraph is effective for audits beginning or after December 31st. And so we're going to go to this release in just a minute, but continuing on in terms of the standards of field work, that we need to have sufficient, appropriate evidential matter through inspection, observation, inquiry, confirmation to afford a reasonable basis for our opinion. We'll go through these standards of reporting before we go to the PCAOB release, but you notice the standards of reporting is the first one is that we report and provide our opinion based upon the whether or not the financial statements are prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP. The second one is that the report shall identify circumstances in which such principles have not been consistently observed. Number three, information related to disclosures are to be regarded as reasonably adequate. So as part of our audit, we're actually auditing the disclosures. And then finally, the fourth piece is that we are conducting the audit and in expressing our opinion on the financial statements taken as a whole, or an assertion to the effect that the opinion cannot be expressed. Okay, so let's go to the PCAOB release and see what we have to say here. So what the release is expressing is that we are now actually, through the PCAOB, is there is now additional guidance in relationship to this process of audit risk, audit planning, supervision of the engagement, and so forth. So you notice that we have the auditing standards, AS8, AS9, and so forth. So let's go back to the PCAOB website and see what we've got here. So again, if we go to the auditing standards, you notice that we have the standards on top. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just want to focus on a couple of items here. So the first item that was talked about in this PCAOB release is the audit risk. So you notice that audit risk is far more detailed in terms of how it relates to the audit. To form an appropriate basis for expressing an opinion on the financial statement, the auditor must plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement due to error or fraud. Reasonable assurance is obtained by reducing audit risk to an appropriate level through applying due professional care, obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence. In an audit of the financial statements, audit risk is the risk that the auditor expresses an inappropriate opinion whether the financial statements are materially misstated. Then we have a definition of what the risk of material misstatement is, and the detection of the risk down here. So again, I'm not going to go through all the details, but you clearly want to explore this area of the PCAOB website. In the audit planning phase, you notice here that the engagement partner is responsible for the engagement and its performance. Accordingly, the engagement partner is responsible for planning the audit and may seek assistance from appropriate engagement team members in fulfilling this responsibility. It identifies very specific preliminary activities. We're going to be talking about this. It identifies very specific planning activities, and we're going to be talking about this. You notice that it identifies an audit strategy, an audit plan, multi-location engagement issues, the changes during the course of the audit, and persons with specialized skill and knowledge. So as we go through the next couple of lectures, keep in mind that what we're talking about are standards that are coming directly from the PCAOB website, and that these are actually the extension of these 10 generally accepted auditing standards. So what we've tried to do here, and I'm going to go back to this link just to make sure that we have it, is if we're at the PCAOB organization website, we go to standards and we go to auditing, is what we're going to identify is the auditing standards. The auditing standards as they apply for the next level of discussion in our activities relates to audit risk, audit planning, supervision, consideration of materiality, the identification and assessing of the risk of material misstatement, the auditor's responsibility related to the risk of material misstatement, evaluating the results, and finally audit evidence. This is going to form the basis for the next couple of lectures that we have. But at this point, the takeaway that you need to have is that there are 3 organizations. These 3 organizations have their own specific standards. The basis of these standards are these 10 auditing standards. These auditing standards include the general standards, standards of field work, and standards of reporting. These standards emanated originally from the AICPA. The PCAOB has redeveloped these, and the international standards are basically using the same basic format that you're seeing here, although with modifications. Now, the key takeaway in this lecture is the fact that the PCAOB has expanded these standards, and they've expanded these standards by looking at specific auditing standards. And again, related to the standards of field work, we clearly want to focus on the auditing standard number 8 all the way through number 15, audit evidence. And we're going to be getting through these in the next couple of lectures. But in any event, what I wanted this to be is a basic understanding and introduction to auditing standards as they apply to the audit. Okay, thank you very much for your time.